It's a great pleasure to be here and to share. I don't want to sound as though I'm a great expert in this. It's just that we have done some thinking about this in the Open Theological Seminary about contextualization of our curriculum and contextualization in general. And in fact, a few years ago, we published a book, not a course, a book, a reader in contextualization for Pakistan. It's in Urdu, but it's about to be available in English, and I have digital copies of this. So this looks at what is contextualization, what's the need of contextualization, how has contextualization been done in the past, particularly in South Asia and in the Muslim world, and what are the challenges facing us now, particularly in Pakistan. And so we have been thinking in terms of this for some time. Now, there's a quotation from one of Phil Parshall's book that actually is from Charles Tabor, which tries to define what is contextualization. And this definition says contextualization is the effort to understand and take seriously the specific context of each human group on its own terms and in all its dimensions: cultural, religious, social, political, economic, and to discern what the gospel says to people in that context. So the issue of contextualization is a very broad one, and it ranges right from the level of what language you use, what style of worship you use, to the language in which you present the gospel, to the form that Christianity takes in a particular culture. And I remember one time there was a lady who was visiting Pakistan from a Bible college in England, and because she didn't speak any Urdu, the only church services that she'd been taken to were the English language services in the cathedral or in the big churches. And of course those churches were built by the British during the British time, and they are copies of English churches. You sit on pews, there's an organ, and you sing the hymns that we sing in England, or at least we used to sing in England maybe 50 years ago. And she thought, we're in Pakistan, why are you worshipping like this? And so she asked the bishop why there was no contextualization. And he got very angry, and he was saying, no, contextualization is wrong, it is compromising the gospel and everything. And she came away thinking, this is a very strange person. And I explained that when she said contextualization, for him it meant what is now the insider movement, particularly Muslims continuing to worship in the mosque even after they're believers in Jesus, this kind of thing. What she was meaning is, why don't you use local instruments and sit on the floor and take your shoes off? And so I explained to her that if she spoke Urdu, she would have gone to churches where it's exactly like that. You take off your shoes, you sit on the floor, the women on one side, the men on one side, and you sing in Punjabi, and you sing with the tabla, the drums, and the baja, the harmonium, and it is totally contextualized within one particular type of context. So contextualization means different things to different people. But basically, the aim is that the gospel message we bring should not be foreign. And we already mentioned, I think yesterday, that in many countries, the gospel is seen as a Western import, often with the colonial powers, with Britain or America. And 200 years ago, the missionaries did tend to come and bring their own culture with them. And certainly in Pakistan, we have that heritage of very English-looking churches and an English style of worship and church architecture, and the way we do things in some ways is very Western. And this is why when we are teaching church history in Pakistan, we always go back to the traditions of the Apostle Thomas and say, you know, Christianity has been in Asia long before the British arrived or the Americans arrived, and to stress the Eastern Church and its heritage, and that Christianity is an Asian religion every bit as much as Islam in particular. So it is trying not to be foreign, but still being a distinctive Christian message. And that is always the tension in contextualization, that we do not compromise the message of the Bible, the message of the gospel, but we try and present it in a way that is understandable and does not cause offense. One example of this that we have done in the Seoul courses, in the Life of Christ 1, there is a section about the person of Jesus as Son of God and Son of Man. And of course, Son of God is like a red rag to a bull for Muslims. And so, with permission from Seoul, Tim Green, who was involved in course development at that time in Pakistan, he rewrote part of that chapter on Son of God to clarify the issues in a way that would be understandable to people in a Muslim context, because the issue has all sorts of other meanings. You just say the word Son of God and it produces immediate reactions. So we looked at our context and said, no, we need to add something here to the existing text in order to make clear the misunderstandings, of course, that people have in a Muslim context of, you know, the Quran says, no, God doesn't have a wife, doesn't have children, in a very, you know, physical sense, more like the kind of idolatry of the pagan Arabs. And so we need to make very clear that when we call Jesus the Son of God, that's not what we're talking about. So we have tried to look at our context and see how that should affect the way we present the material in our courses. And especially when courses are being translated and adapted from other programs like Seoul or elsewhere, or even Tafti. India and Pakistan are very similar in many ways, but there are also differences. And we were adapting and translating the course on poverty and development. And of course, all the statistical information is about India. And we said to our translator, no, we need to have the information about Pakistan. So what he did, every time the word India came, he put Pakistan. He didn't change the statistics, he just changed the name. So one of the things one of my colleagues has been doing has been researching the facts and figures for Pakistan on population growth, on health issues, education, 5-year plans, all of this kind of thing, so that it is relevant to our Pakistani situation. Obviously, the biblical material and some of the case studies we haven't changed, but we have at least made it more relevant to Pakistan. So when we think about contextualization, the word comes from the word for context, our context. Okay, so what is our context? That's the first thing we need to consider. What is our context in which we are functioning as Christians and as educators? And then the second point we need to think about is, how does context affect content? And in some ways, it is always happening. I did have another question: should context affect content? But actually it always does, even if we're not aware of it. And I think then tomorrow, when we think about hidden curriculum, often the hidden curriculum has come out of the original context, the cultural way that things are done in your country or your region, that actually might be contradicting what you're trying to say in your content. So that it does affect, but we can be more intentional to make it affect our content in a positive way that really communicates. So when we think what is our context, there are different contexts. We are all in different contexts. First of all, we have a geographical context. Which continent are we in? What is our country? What is our region? What is our continent? And when we have discussion afterwards, we will divide up into regional groups, because obviously there are things in our context geographically which maybe aren't relevant to someone from a different geographical region. But then we are in a global context, global connections. We saw that yesterday. We had a conversation with David Samuel sitting in India through Skype. So we cannot be isolated from the rest of the world. Then we are all in a religious context of some sort. And I think in every case, we are, as Christians, in a minority in a non-Christian majority, whatever that majority may be, whether it's Islam, whether it's Buddhism, whether it's Orthodox Church, whether it's Hinduism. We're all in a different context. But there's not just us, will be other significant other minorities. In Pakistan, although it is 96% Muslim, there is a significant number of Hindus. And actually they are very responsive to the gospel. So when we think of contextualization, we have to think of that context also. Then the question of new heresies. We need to be aware that there is many false teaching even within the church. And in some countries, particularly in Pakistan and in India, maybe others as well, religious fundamentalism and politically motivated terrorism. I remember when we visited Nepal, we had to be very careful about whether we could travel to Pokhara or not, because at that time the Maoist guerrillas were still very active. And I remember Tonka telling us about how that affected their work in some areas, that some areas were totally under the domination of the Maoists, and how difficult it was. So it's not only Pakistan. Then we have a social context as well, with many different cultures and languages and traditions. And there is almost no country which is monocultural. Maybe Korea, to a large extent, is monocultural, but even in Korea now you have many minorities, other language groups, and certainly in Pakistan, there is not one single Pakistani culture or Pakistani language. There are regional cultures, provincial languages, and traditions. Then for many of us, part of our social context is a context of poverty, injustice, corruption, feudalism. And in the former communist countries, there will be a whole raft of other issues. Then many of us, being minorities, are facing discrimination and prejudice, particularly in Muslim countries, but probably in other countries as well. Growing population, I think that is probably a fact in all, particularly Asian countries. Population growth, which means that the percentage of young people under 15, is increasing day by day almost. And so this is a growing group of people for whom there is a need for religious education, Christian education. And just moving on to our global context, just to know that we're not alone in these issues. Ross Kinsler is a name I'm sure many of you have heard of, one of the pioneers of TEE. And he wrote a very interesting article in 2007 called Doing Ministry for Change, Theological Education in the 21st Century. And he picked out some aspects of our global context as a church, and he picked out one of his three main areas was injustice: racial injustice, economic injustice, gender injustice. And one of the questions we have to ask is, does our curriculum address any of these issues? Ecological destruction, the environment, the damage to the environment. A couple of years ago, the deforestation in Indonesia, the burning of the forests in Indonesia affected the whole world because it produced a smoke layer that affected air travel in many countries. So ecological destruction. They cut down forests in Nepal, and you get floods in Bangladesh. So it is a fact that we are in a global situation of ecological destruction. And the third issue that he felt was very important was the need for integral and systemic wholeness. Holistic mission, we often know the word, and in these days, Tear Fund particularly is using the word integral mission, that everything should be affected. It's not just, man is not just a spirit, but we are bodies and minds as well. And Tear Fund is one of our close partners working with us in OTS, and their vision statement says to contribute to the economic, physical, psychological, social and spiritual transformation of poor women, children and men in Pakistan. That is part of their partnership agreement with us. So this is the context in which we are doing theological education. So we think sometimes education, we're just talking about people's minds, but actually it's not. It's about the whole personality. And some of you are familiar with the Millennium Development Goals. The United Nations organization set these goals that were to be achieved by 2015. Well, we're getting very close to that. And there was a recent article in Pakistan about one of the provinces saying how far we are from achieving those goals. Eradicate poverty and hunger. Wow, we've only got 2 years to go. Achieve universal primary education. Well, of course, with the ever-increasing population growth, that is becoming increasingly challenging. Promote gender equality and empower women. Reduce child mortality. Improve maternal health. Combat HIV, AIDS, malaria, and other diseases. Ensure environmental sustainability. Build global partnership for development. Sorry, I'll leave that on. This is all should be part of our goals as well as theological educators, Christian educators. The Bible has plenty to say about these issues. A couple of years ago, the Bible Society in England published a Peace and Justice Bible. And all the verses or passages that related to peace and justice, they highlighted in red, just to show people how much the Bible had to say about these issues. Well, how much do our Bible courses say about peace and justice, about environmental sustainability? I think often there are blank spots in our curriculum because of this. So our context does affect our content. Some ways unintentionally, other ways intentionally. So this is the first question: should our context affect the content of our theological education curriculum? how far should the context affect the content? And sometimes maybe the context affects our methodology more than we realize. We've already mentioned how much the struggle it is to keep the TEE methodology of group discussion and participation, when so much of the surrounding culture is rote learning, memorization, and that whatever the teacher says is correct. And they are the only ones who have truth and knowledge, and the students are empty vessels. So there are effects, but how can we be more intentional? Our religious context, we need to have an understanding of the other religions and ideologies surrounding us. And therefore we need appropriate apologetics. Some of the apologetics, there are excellent books written in the West, but they're written in a different context. They're answering different questions. The theory and practice of appropriate methods of evangelism. For Muslims, it will be different to Hindus. For post-communists, will be different again. And the motivation to reach the unreached peoples. And of course, a good understanding of our own Christian doctrine and of heresies. Our social context, awareness of other cultures and traditions, ability to communicate the gospel cross-culturally, awareness of these social and ethical issues, and an ability to address these issues, personal and social ethical issues, biblically and in culturally appropriate ways, including counselling issues. And I'm aware my time is running out, so we'll just go quickly through the others, I'm sorry. Awareness of local church history, including national histories, national heroes, and the reasons for prejudice. The difficulties the Pakistani Christians face are historical, because of the historical background most of them came from. And we need to understand that if we understand why people are prejudiced against us. Understanding about persecution, teaching about persecution, that it is part of discipleship and an ability to endure it. And then we need to understand the modern youth culture, including the influences and dangers of the media, and a knowledge of and practice of effective Christian education for children and youth, as well as for adults, of course. And then this was a very brief introduction. Sorry it's so brief. There are things I can give you on digitally with more information, and my points are from the PowerPoint. But we, in our groups, will consider what are our context, geographical, religious, cultural, social, economic. Should the context affect the content? How far should it affect? And in what ways does it or should it affect our content? So I put them on the board as well, but we will go into that. Do come and ask me questions afterwards, but the time is up, so thank you.